The courtroom felt colder than I expected. Not physically cold, just quiet in a way that made every movement sound deliberate. Papers sliding across tables, shoes against tile, the low murmur of lawyers preparing their folders. Across the aisle sat my husband, technically still my husband. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, speaking calmly with his attorney as if this were just another meeting on his schedule. Every so often he glanced toward me with a faint, confident expression that wasn't quite a smile. What hurt more was who sat beside him. My daughter. Emma sat one chair behind him, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't look angry. She didn't look hostile. She just didn't look at me. For months I had imagined this moment many different ways. I had prepared myself for the humiliation of hearing Daniel's version of our marriage spoken aloud, in front of strangers. I had even prepared myself for seeing the woman he had been seeing during the last year of our marriage. What I had never imagined was Emma choosing to sit on his side of the room. The judge entered and everyone stood. The hearing began. Daniel's lawyer spoke first. His voice was polished, measured. He framed the divorce as the unfortunate result of a marriage that had gradually deteriorated. There were mentions of communication problems, emotional distance, financial disagreements. The affair itself was mentioned only briefly, almost as an afterthought. What the lawyer emphasized more carefully was my supposed instability over the past year, how I had overreacted. When I discovered messages, how my accusations had created tension in the home. I sat quietly while he spoke. Every now and then I looked toward Emma. She kept her eyes lowered. When Daniel was asked to speak, he sounded calm, controlled. Our marriage had problems for a long time, he said. I tried to keep things stable for Emma. The sentence landed strangely, stable. As if I had been the unstable element. My lawyer took notes beside me without interrupting. That was his style. Let the other side talk until they believed their own narrative. The hearing moved slowly through documents and timelines. The more Daniel's lawyer spoke, the more confident Daniel seemed to become. His shoulders relaxed. His voice grew steadier. At one point he glanced toward me again. That faint expression returned. Not quite a smirk, but close enough. Then my lawyer stood. He adjusted his glasses and spoke in the same calm tone he had used since the beginning of the case. Your Honor, before we conclude, we would like to call one additional witness. The room shifted slightly. Daniel frowned. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering something. The judge looked down at the file. One more witness, she said. Yes, Your Honor. There was a brief pause. Very well. The courtroom door opened. At first I didn't look back. But I heard the subtle change in the room's atmosphere, the quiet ripple of attention as someone entered. Daniel turned in his seat. And for the first time that morning, his expression changed. Color drained from his face. The woman who walked toward the witness stand was not his mistress. It was his former business partner. Karen Holt had worked with Daniel for almost a decade. They had built several projects together before suddenly dissolving their partnership the previous year. At the time, Daniel told everyone she had decided to retire. Karen sat down calmly and took the oath. My lawyer approached the stand. Ms. Holt, he said gently, could you explain why your partnership with Mr. Reeves ended? Karen glanced briefly toward Daniel. Then she answered. Over the next 10 minutes she described something Daniel had never mentioned during the divorce proceedings. While he was conducting his affair, he had also been quietly moving shared company funds through accounts tied to his personal investments, money that technically belonged to both of us during the marriage. The room grew very still. Daniel's attorney tried to interrupt. The judge raised a hand. Let her finish. Karen's testimony was precise, documented, difficult to dismiss. For the first time since the hearing began, Daniel stopped looking confident. He looked cornered. The judge asked several questions of her own. Then she turned toward Daniel's attorney. I believe this changes the scope of today's discussion. No one argued. I didn't feel triumph. What I felt was something quieter. Across the aisle, Emma finally looked at me. Not for long. Just a brief, uncertain glance before her eyes dropped again. Confusion had replaced the certainty she carried into the courtroom. When the hearing ended, people stood slowly. Lawyers gathered papers, the judge exited through the side door. Daniel avoided looking at anyone. Emma remained seated a moment longer than the rest of us. I waited near the aisle as she walked past. For a second, I thought she might speak. But she hesitated, then continued toward the exit beside her father. I watched them leave together. Outside the courthouse the afternoon sun was bright. Almost too bright after the dim courtroom lights. My lawyer spoke briefly about next steps, but his voice sounded distant. Because the truth was, the legal outcome already felt less important than something else. The court could correct records. It could divide assets. It could expose lies. But none of those things could immediately fix the quiet space that had opened between me and my daughter. And as I stood there on the courthouse steps, I realized something difficult. The deepest part of this case was never the divorce. It was waiting to see whether the truth would eventually be strong enough to find its way back to her.